Chosen one, why are you still awake at 2:47 a.m., scrolling through messages that feel empty while your soul screams for something real? Why does your heart pound when you see certain scriptures, like your spirit recognizes a frequency your mind forgot? Why have you felt, your entire life, like you're carrying a secret too dangerous to speak out loud? Listen to me carefully, chosen one. I don't know how you found this message. Maybe you typed, "feeling forgotten by God" into the search bar. Maybe you were crying in your kitchen at 3 a.m. and your thumb just clicked. But I know this with every fiber of my being, you didn't stumble on it. You were summoned. And they never wanted you to hear what I'm about to tell you. See, there's been a cover-up. Not in Washington, not on Wall Street, in the spiritual realm. For decades, maybe, your entire lifetime, certain truths have been buried, classified, kept from God's most precious weapons. Why? Because if you ever discovered who you really are, if you ever understood what's been planted in your DNA, if you ever realized why your life has been so hard, the enemy's kingdom would crumble overnight. This message wasn't supposed to reach you. They tried to bury it under church politics, under religious tradition, under the lie that says your best days are behind you. But heaven intervened, and what you're about to hear will shatter every limitation they've whispered over your life. Before we go deeper into this sacred revelation, I want to pause and thank every single one of you who has supported this message through super thanks. Your generosity means more than you know. You're not just donating, you're helping spread light to others who feel alone in their calling. Whether you give or not, I'm deeply grateful for your presence here. Your support, your time, your attention, it all matters. And if this message resonates with your soul, go ahead and let the Holy Spirit lead your heart. But here's what's going to wreck your theology and rebuild your identity. What if the silence in your life wasn't abandonment but alignment? What if the delay wasn't denial but divine design? What if every closed door, every unanswered prayer, every season when heaven felt locked, was actually God positioning you for something so magnificent that if it had come any earlier, it would have destroyed you? If something in your chest is already stirring, if your spirit is trembling with recognition right now, type "I'm ready" in the comments. Because what comes next will either transform your understanding of your purpose forever, or you'll dismiss it as another sermon and stay exactly where you are. The choice is yours, chosen one. But heaven is holding its breath, waiting for your response. Time to tell you everything. Why does every sunrise feel like a gentle interrogation from heaven? Why do you catch yourself staring at strangers' faces in the grocery store, searching for something familiar that you can't quite name? Why, after 70, 80, maybe 90 years on this earth, do you still feel like you're waiting for your real life to begin? Dear chosen one, let me tell you something that will either heal the deepest wound in your soul or confirm what you've always suspected but were too afraid to voice. You have been carrying a homesickness that no earthly address could ever cure. Ever felt like a refugee in your own skin? Ever gazed out your kitchen window at 4 a.m. and felt your heart reaching towards something beyond the horizon, something that felt more like home than the house you've lived in for decades? That ache in your chest wasn't loneliness. That restless stirring wasn't dissatisfaction. That was the whisper of heaven, and it has been following you since your first conscious breath. You see, most people walk through life like tourists visiting a foreign country, but you've always felt like an exile, haven't you? Like someone displaced from their true kingdom, carrying memories of a homeland you've never seen but somehow remember. And that feeling, that divine discontent, it never left you because it was never meant to. Think back to when you were 7 years old. Remember that Sunday morning when you sat in church and something stirred in your small chest, something ancient, something that made you feel larger than your little body could contain. You looked around at the adults singing hymns, and you wondered why they seemed so comfortable when you felt like you were about to burst into flames with something you couldn't understand. Your parents called it being sensitive. Your teachers labeled it daydreaming. But heaven called it recognition. Your spirit was remembering what your mind had forgotten. As you grew older, that whisper didn't fade, it transformed. In your 20s, it became restlessness that made you change jobs, change cities, change relationships, always searching for something that felt like completion. In your 40s, it evolved into a spiritual hunger that church services couldn't satisfy, that sermons couldn't fill, that religious activities couldn't quiet. And now, in these golden years when the world tells you to settle down, slow down, wind down, that whisper has become a roar. Because time is short, and whatever has been calling you all these decades is no longer content to wait in the shadows of your consciousness. Jeremiah 31:3 declares, "I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with unfailing kindness." But here's what most preachers won't tell you about that. Versa, Hebrew word for drawn, is mashak, which means to drag, to pull with irresistible force. God hasn't been gently inviting you, dear one. He's been hunting you with relentless divine pursuit. That depression that visited you in your 50s when everything seemed meaningless. That wasn't a chemical imbalance, that was your soul rejecting a life too small for your calling. That anxiety that grips you when you think about wasted years. That's not mental illness, that's spiritual urgency. Your spirit knows something your mind hasn't figured out yet. You are an ancient scroll wrapped in human flesh, carrying words that were written before the foundation of the world. You are a secret weapon disguised as an ordinary grandparent, a sleeping lion who's been told you're a house cat. You are heaven's classified document, and the enemy has spent decades trying to convince you that you're just another page in someone else's story. But what if every moment you felt crazy was actually a moment you were catching glimpses of your true identity? What if every time you felt too intense, too deep, too much for this world, you were actually feeling the weight of another realm pressing through your earthly vessel? The Apostle Paul understood this when he wrote in 2 Corinthians 5:2. "Meanwhile we groan, longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling." That groaning isn't pathology, it's prophecy. It's your eternal spirit straining against temporary limitations. You've spent decades thinking something was wrong with you. Your family worried about your intensity. Your friends couldn't understand your spiritual hunger. Your church thought you asked too many deep questions. But what if nothing was wrong with you? What if everything was exactly right, and you were the only one brave enough to feel the full weight of what God planted in your DNA? That whisper that followed you through childhood wonder, adult silence, and recent loneliness wasn't your imagination running wild. It was your Creator calling you home to yourself, to the version of you that existed in His mind before time began, the you that got buried under expectations, responsibilities, and the slow erosion of believing you were ordinary. You thought it was depression, it was divine discontent. You thought you were crazy, you were chosen. And now, after all these years of wondering if you heard Him correctly, if you were special enough, if your time had passed now, God is ready to reveal why He never let that whisper die. Why did it grow stronger instead of weaker? Why it became more urgent instead of more peaceful? Because, chosen one, the whisper wasn't preparing you for heaven, it was preparing you for now. But what you're about to discover next will explain why that preparation had to be so intense, so long, and sometimes so painful that you wondered if you'd survive it. You know, for the last 40, 50, maybe 60 years, you've been asking yourself the same haunting question: God, why does it feel like you put me on the shelf? Why does it seem like other people got their breakthrough at 30, 40, 50? You're still waiting at 70, 80, 90 years old. Let me tell you something that's going to shatter every lie the enemy has whispered in your ear about your wilderness seasons. You weren't buried, you were planted. Think about Moses for a moment. 80 years old when God called him from that burning bush. 80. The world would have put him in a retirement home, but God said, "Now you're ready." Why? Because for 40 years in Pharaoh's palace, Moses learned privilege. For 40 years in the desert, he learned patience. But it took 80 years to learn power. Your wilderness wasn't punishment, chosen one. It was preparation. I'm talking to the woman who buried her husband after 53 years of marriage. You wake up every morning to silence so thick you can taste it. The coffee tastes different when you're brewing it for one. The house echoes with memories, but your heart echoes with a deeper question. Lord, what am I supposed to do now? Let me shock you with the truth. Widowhood wasn't your ending. It was your commission. Look at Anna the prophetess, 84 years old, widowed after only 7 years of marriage. The world saw an old woman haunting the temple, but God saw a prayer warrior so dangerous that when the Messiah walked through those doors, she was the first to recognize him. Luke 2:38 says she spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. Your husband's passing didn't silence your voice, it amplified it. Because now you pray with the desperation of someone who knows how quickly everything can change. And you, dear one, who thought retirement would be your golden years. Instead, it feels like golden handcuffs. You're watching the world through windows, feeling forgotten while younger generations chase dreams with energy you remember having. The church you served for 30 years barely remembers your name. The committees you chaired have moved on without you. You feel like damaged goods on a clearance rack. But what if I told you that your exile wasn't rejection, it was redirection? David spent 7 years hiding in caves before he touched the throne. 7 years, running from King Saul, sleeping on rocks, wondering if God had forgotten the promise Samuel whispered over him as a boy. But every night in those caves, David wasn't just surviving, he was writing psalms that would comfort millions for thousands of years. Your isolation wasn't abandonment, it was your seminary. Those hours alone with nothing but your thoughts and your Bible. That was God downloading wisdom into your spirit that prosperity could never teach you. Those nights when you cried out in an empty house, heaven was recording every word as liquid gold in bottles of intercession. I see you there, chosen one, and I know your story. Your children stopped calling regularly. Your grandkids are too busy with their devices to sit and listen to your stories. The church you poured your life into replaced your wisdom with programs, your experience with enthusiasm. They made you feel obsolete. But here's what they didn't tell you. Obsolete to man means essential to God. Jeremiah was considered obsolete. They threw him in a pit. Job was considered obsolete. His friends told him to curse God and die. Elijah felt obsolete. He sat under a tree begging God to take his life. But God said to each of them what he's saying to you right now. You're not finished. You're fermented. Wine doesn't get weaker, with age it gets stronger. And you, dear one, you are aged wine in the Master's cellar, and he's been saving you for the most important toast of your lifetime. They told you your season was over. They whispered that your best days were behind you. They convinced you to step aside, sit down, and fade quietly into the background. But I hear heaven thundering a different message over your life. They said you were too old. Heaven says you're just getting dangerous. You see, the enemy knows something about seasoned saints that young believers haven't learned yet. You've got nothing left to lose and everything eternal to gain. You've been through enough valleys to know that God is faithful. You've weathered enough storms to know that his promises don't expire with age. You've buried enough dreams to know that resurrection is real. That's not just wisdom, chosen one, that's warfare. Spiritual warfare disguised as grey hair and reading glasses. The devil spent decades trying to convince you that your struggles meant God didn't love you, but every closed door was protecting you from settling for less than his best. Every delayed answer was developing your character for an assignment that required someone unbreakable. Every silent season was sacred preparation for a sound that would shake kingdoms. Moses delivered a nation at 80. Caleb conquered mountains at 85. Sarah birthed nations at 90. Your birth certificate is not your expiration date, it's your experience certificate. But here's the urgency burning in my spirit right now. Time is shorter than you think. Not your time, but the world's time to hear what you carry. This generation is drowning in confusion while you're sitting on solutions. They're dying for authentic faith while you're carrying tested faith. They need to see what it looks like when someone has walked with God long enough to trust him in the dark. Your wilderness seasons weren't random. Your delays weren't divine neglect. Your isolation wasn't punishment. It was all preparation for this moment when God says, "Now, release what I've built in the secret place." If you've ever asked, "Why me, Lord?" type it now. Let heaven hear what religion tried to silence. Because your why me is about to become. This is why. The wilderness is ending, chosen one. But what emerges from this desert won't be the same person who entered it. What's coming out is someone the enemy never saw coming, someone dangerous enough to change the atmosphere just by showing up. You know what they told you about those strange dreams you had as a child? The ones where you saw things that hadn't happened yet? The ones where you woke up knowing things you were never taught? They called it imagination. They called it coincidence. They called it everything except what it really was: divine download. But here's what breaks my heart, chosen one. For 70, 80, maybe 90 years, you've been walking around carrying heaven's fingerprint on your soul, and nobody, not your pastor, not your family, not even you, understood what you were seeing in the mirror. Listen to what God declared over the prophet Jeremiah, and I want you to hear this as if he's speaking directly to you. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Jeremiah 1-5. Before you were born, not after you proved yourself worthy, not after you cleaned up your act. Before your first breath, before your first heartbeat, the creator of the universe looked at you and said, "This one is mine." You were marked, not made. Think about that for a moment. Every other person was created, but you were consecrated, set apart, sealed with something that neither time nor trauma could erase. And I'll prove it to you right now. Remember when you were 8 years old and you prayed for your sick grandmother? You didn't know theology. You didn't understand intercession. You just knew something was wrong. And you talked to God like he was sitting right there in your bedroom. And she lived another 15 years, didn't she? That wasn't beginner's luck, beloved. That was the mark activating. Remember in your 20s when you walked into that job interview and something inside you said, "This isn't it." You couldn't explain it. It looked perfect on paper. Great salary, great benefits. But something in your spirit said no. And 3 months later, that company went bankrupt. That wasn't intuition. That was divine protection flowing through the mark you carry. Remember when your own child was making terrible decisions, drugs, wrong relationships, rebellion that broke your heart, and you prayed prayers that seemed to bounce off heaven's ceiling for years? And then one day, out of nowhere, they called you crying, saying they didn't know why, but they needed to come home. That wasn't a coincidence. That was your prayers, marked with heaven's authority, finally breaking through. You see, the world looks at you and sees an elderly person dealing with Medicare and Social Security. But heaven sees something entirely different. Heaven sees a walking miracle, a living testament, a breathing prophecy that refuses to be silenced by age or circumstance. The enemy has been trying to convince you that those moments were random, that your sensitivity to spiritual things is just you being emotional, that your ability to sense when someone needs prayer is just being observant. But I'm here to tell you something that will shatter every lie he's whispered. You carry the mark of the Most High God, and that mark has been operating in your life since the day you drew breath. Why do you think strangers tell you their deepest secrets in grocery store lines? Why do children gravitate toward you without explanation? Why do your grandchildren sense something different about you, something they can't name but trust completely? Because they recognize the mark, even when you don't. You are heaven's undercover agent, disguised in silver hair and comfortable shoes. But here's what the enemy fears most about your generation. He's terrified that you'll finally wake up to who you really are. Because when a marked one understands their identity, when they stop apologizing for their spiritual sensitivity and start operating in their divine authority, mountains move, generational curses break, dead things come alive. The world told you to fade quietly into retirement. God says you're entering your most dangerous decade. Think about Moses, 80 years old when God called him from a burning bush. 80. The world would have put him in an assisted living facility, but God was just activating the mark that had been dormant for 8 decades. Every rejection, every failure, every year in the wilderness had been preparation for the moment when heaven would say, now you're ready. That's you, chosen one. Every heartbreak has been preparation. Every disappointment has been positioned. Every season of silence has been God preparing you for your burning bush moment. And here's the evidence that you carry the mark. You're still here. After everything life threw at you, every storm that should have destroyed you, every diagnosis that should have defeated you, every betrayal that should have broken you, you're still standing. That's not luck. That's not good genes. That's the mark of divine protection that cannot be erased. The world saw wrinkles. Heaven saw royalty. You were not made. You were marked. You think those lines on your face are signs of aging? No, beloved. They're etchings of wisdom. Each one tells a story of a battle fought and won. Each gray hair is a crown of glory earned through decades of faithfulness. You're not deteriorating. You're being perfected. But the enemy knows something about marked ones that maybe you've forgotten. He knows that the older you get, the more dangerous you become, because age brings you closer to eternity, and proximity to eternity brings clarity of purpose. He knows that a 70-year-old who understands their divine marking is more dangerous than 1,000 20-year-olds who are still trying to figure out who they are. That's why the warfare has been so intense in your later years. That's why depression tried to visit you in your 60s. That's why loneliness knocked on your door in your 70s. That's why physical ailments attacked your body when your spirit was getting stronger. The enemy was making one last desperate attempt to silence you before you discovered the truth. But he failed. You're here. You're listening. And something in your chest is stirring right now because your spirit recognizes what I'm telling you. You are heaven's fingerprint, disguised in silver hair, and a lifetime of experience that has refined you into pure gold. And God is about to show the world what happens when his marked ones finally remember who they are. The question burning in heaven right now is this: will you finally stop hiding the mark and start walking in it? Because what God is preparing to release through you next will require every year of preparation, every scar of refinement, every moment of marking you've carried your entire life. Your assignment isn't winding down, beloved. It's about to explode into manifestation. And the world has no idea what's coming through, someone they wrote off as just another senior citizen. But you're about to show them the difference between being marked and being made. Dear chosen one, I need you to stop right now and think about something that's going to shatter everything you believed about your struggles. Why has your life been so hard? Why have you faced battles that would have broken weaker people? Why does it feel like every time you take 2 steps forward, something knocks you 3 steps back? You've been told it's bad luck. You've been told it's just life. You've been told to accept it, pray harder, have more faith. But what if I told you something that would change how you see every attack you've ever endured? The devil doesn't waste his ammunition on empty targets. Let that sink deep into your spirit right now. Satan doesn't deploy his best demons against people who pose no threat to his kingdom. He doesn't orchestrate elaborate schemes to destroy ordinary lives. But you've been in his crosshairs since the day you were born. Why? Because hell saw what heaven planted inside you before you even knew it existed. Think about Joseph. 17 years old when God gave him dreams of ruling nations. What happened next? His own brothers threw him in a pit and sold him into slavery, false accusations, prison, forgotten by the very people he helped. For 13 years, Joseph looked like a failure to everyone watching. But here's what the enemy knew that Joseph didn't understand yet. Those dreams weren't just visions, they were prophecies. And Satan was so terrified of what Joseph would become that he mobilized an entire network of betrayal to try to stop it. The attack wasn't about Joseph's past, it was about his future. Look at Moses. 40 years in Pharaoh's palace, 40 years in the wilderness exile, thinking his purpose had died with his youth. But what the enemy feared wasn't the prince Moses had been, it was the deliverer Moses was destined to become. Every year of that exile, hell was whispering, maybe we stopped him. Maybe we buried his calling in the desert sand. But God was building something in that wilderness that a palace could never produce. Unshakable dependence on divine power. Consider a Job. The Bible says he was blameless and upright. So why did Satan specifically target him? Job 1-8. records God himself saying, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him." The attack came not because Job was weak, but because his righteousness was so pure, so powerful, that it threatened the very foundation of hell's lies about God's faithfulness. Now look at yourself. Really look. Every financial crisis that should have destroyed you but didn't. Every health scare that should have taken you out but couldn't. Every relationship that should have broken you but somehow made you stronger. The enemy didn't attack your comfort, dear one. He attacked your calling. That depression that hit you in your 50s when you should have been at your peak. Hell saw the ministry brewing in your pain. That divorce that shattered your world. The devil recognized the authority you'd carry to heal broken marriages. That prodigal child who broke your heart. Satan knew you'd become a spiritual mother to the lost and abandoned. He didn't attack you because you were failing. He attacked you because you were loaded with destiny. Every midnight cry in that hospital room when the doctors said there was no hope that wasn't just sickness, that was warfare. Every hour you spent in that prayer closet, begging God for a breakthrough that seemed to never come, that wasn't abandoned intercession. That was angelic boot camp. Every tear you shed in silent grief, wondering if anyone even saw your faithfulness that was liquid anointing being refined in the furnace of your faith. But here's what breaks my heart and should ignite your spirit. While you were calling it suffering, heaven was calling it preparation. While you were asking, "Why me?" God was answering, "Because I trust you with this." The enemy made one fatal mistake. He showed his hand too early. By attacking you so viciously, he revealed that you're carrying something he desperately wants to stop. Every assault was actually confirmation of your assignment. You think you've been fighting random demons? No, beloved. You've been facing principalities and powers that know exactly what you're carrying and exactly what it will cost them when you step into it. Romans 8:28 doesn't have an expiration date, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. All things, every betrayal, every setback, every night you wanted to quit but didn't. The warfare wasn't trying to destroy you. It was revealing who you really are underneath everything the world tried to tell you about yourself. You survived what would have broken others. You kept your heart soft when it should have turned to stone. You held on to faith when logic said, "Let go." That's not normal human resilience. That's supernatural strength that only comes from carrying something precious. And now, right now, all those years of attack are about to become years of authority. All those seasons of warfare are about to become seasons of victory. All those moments of hell are about to birth a testimony that will shake the very foundations of darkness. The enemy thought he was destroying you. God was actually preparing you for the greatest comeback in your family's history. If you're still standing after everything that tried to take you out, after all the betrayals, all the losses, all the nights you shouldn't have survived, comment right now, "I survived for a reason." Because what I'm about to reveal next will show you exactly what that reason is and why heaven has been protecting what hell has been trying to kill. Dear precious soul, I need you to stop right where you are and listen to what I'm about to tell you. Because what you've been calling your biggest mistake, your deepest regret, your most painful failure, heaven has been calling your greatest qualification. You see, there's something they never told you about your bloodline, something that's been hidden in the whispers of your ancestors, buried under decades of shame and disappointment. But tonight, God is pulling back the veil. You are not an accident of biology. You are not a random collection of genetics gone wrong. You are the culmination of prayers whispered in the dark by people who never lived to see their answer. Picture your grandmother, kneeling beside her bed in 1952, tears streaming down her weathered face, crying out to God, "Lord, please, let someone in this family know your goodness. Let someone break these chains. Let someone rise up and show this world that you still move mountains." That prayer, it had your name on it before you were ever born. Think about your father, sitting in his pickup truck after another failed job interview, staring at the bills he couldn't pay, whispering through broken pride, "God, I couldn't be the man they needed me to be, but maybe someone in my bloodline can be what I never was." Dear one, that someone is sitting here right now, listening to my voice. You thought you inherited their struggles, but what you really inherited was their intercession. Every tear they cried, every midnight prayer they whispered, every moment they felt like failures, it was all building toward you. You are the branch that broke the curse. You are the generation that said no more. You are the answer they prayed for but never lived to see. But the enemy has been working overtime to convince you otherwise, hasn't he? He's whispered lies in your ear for decades. Look at your life. Look at your mistakes. Look at your age. If God was going to use you, wouldn't he have done it by now? That's not God's voice, beloved. That's the voice of the very darkness your ancestors prayed against. Isaiah 61:3 declares that God will give you beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. But here's what most preachers won't tell you: those ashes aren't just yours. They're generational ashes. The burnt dreams of your grandfather, the destroyed hopes of your mother, the shattered faith of aunts and uncles who gave up believing miracles were possible. And God has been collecting every ash, every broken piece, every fragment of disappointed hope, and he's about to turn it all into something beautiful through your life. You think your struggles disqualified you. Number. They equipped you. You think your pain was pointless. Number. It was purposeful. Every battle you fought, every valley you walked through, every night you cried yourself to sleep, wondering if God had forgotten you. It was all preparation for this moment when you finally understand who you are. You are not just carrying your own dreams, chosen one. You are carrying the unfulfilled destinies of everyone who came before you. That restlessness in your spirit, that's their hunger for breakthrough. That fire in your bones, that's their passion for God finally finding expression. That authority in your prayers, that's decades of intercession flowing through your vocal cords. Romans 8:28 promises that all things work together for good, to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. But did you know that all things includes the failures of your father, the mistakes of your mother, the trauma of your childhood, the broken promises of your youth? God doesn't waste pain, beloved. He transforms it into power. Right now, across this nation, there are people sitting in darkness, convinced they're too broken, too old, too damaged to matter. They need to see someone who's been where they are. They need to witness what happens when generational shame gets replaced by generational breakthrough. They need you to stand up and declare that God still redeems the rejected. Your children who walked away from faith, they need to see authentic transformation in their parents. Your grandchildren who think Christianity is outdated, they need to witness supernatural power flowing through someone their own age. Your neighbors who've written off God as irrelevant, they need to encounter the divine through someone who lives on their street. But here's the shocking truth that's going to change everything. You weren't just saved for heaven. You were saved to unlock someone else's destiny. You weren't just delivered for your own freedom. You were delivered to become a deliverer. The very struggles that made you feel worthless are about to become your ministry credentials. The very wounds that made you feel damaged are about to become your healing tools. The very pain that made you question God's love is about to become proof of his faithfulness to someone who's drowning in that same pain right now. Galatians 6:2 commands us to bear one another's burdens. But you can't carry what you haven't conquered. You can't heal what you haven't been healed from. You can't deliver someone from a pit you've never climbed out of. God allowed you to go through everything you've been through so you could become the answer to prayers you don't even know are being prayed. Somewhere tonight, there's a widow crying the same tears you cried 5 years ago. Somewhere, there's a broken father feeling the same failure your father felt. Somewhere, there's a person your exact age, convinced their best days are behind them, and heaven is saying, I have someone for them. Someone who's been exactly where they are. Someone who knows the way out because they've walked the path themselves. That someone is you. If you truly believe that your life is still an answer to prayers being whispered in the dark tonight, then you need to write these 4 words in the comments right now. I accept the assignment. Because, dear one, The prayer meeting in heaven isn't over. And you're not just an attendee anymore. You're the answer they've been waiting for. But accepting this assignment means everything about your ordinary life is about to become extraordinary. You know what breaks my heart? It's watching God's chosen ones march in circles for decades, wondering why nothing changes. Why do the same problems keep showing up? Why do the same doors keep slamming shut? Why do the prayers seem to bounce off heaven's ceiling like rubber balls? But what if I told you that every circle you've walked, every lap around your impossibility, every year you felt stuck in the same old story? What if none of it was wasted time? Listen to me, chosen one. You've been living Joshua chapter 6, and you didn't even know it. Picture this: the walls of Jericho, 40 feet high, 15 feet thick, impenetrable. The Israelites looked at those walls and saw impossible, but God saw it as inevitable. He told Joshua something that sounded absolutely insane. March around the city once a day for 6 days. Just walk. Don't talk. Don't shout. Just circle. Can you imagine what that felt like? Day 1, marching in silence while the enemy laughed from the walls. Day 2, same route, same stones, same mocking voices. Day 3, 4, 5, nothing. No cracks, no movement, no sign that God was even paying attention. By day 6, I guarantee you some of those Israelites were whispering, "Are we just walking in circles? Did we hear God wrong? Maybe Moses was right to die in the wilderness. Maybe this promised land thing was just a dream." But here's what they couldn't see. Here's what you haven't been able to see. Every step around that wall was building spiritual pressure. Every silent lap was loading heaven's ammunition. Every day that looked like nothing was happening was actually everything being positioned. You see, dear one, that's been your life. You've been marching around your Jericho for 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, around the wall of that broken marriage that never got fixed, around the wall of that addiction that claimed 3 generations of your family, around the wall of financial struggle that's been your shadow since you were 25 years old. You've circled your health crisis. You've walked around your prodigal children so many times, you've worn a path in the spiritual realm. You've marched around that depression, that loneliness, that sense that God forgot about you somewhere in the wilderness between promise and fulfillment. And every year, the wall looked exactly the same. But chosen one, I need you to understand something that's going to shatter every doubt you've carried. The clock in heaven just struck 7, not 7 o'clock. 7, the number of divine completion, the number that signals the end of one season and the explosive beginning of another. The number that tells hell its time is up and tells heaven its moment has come. You've been walking around your Jericho in silence long enough. You've been patient long enough. You've been faithful in the face of 0 evidence long enough. Because today, this very day you're hearing my voice, is your 7th day. Do you feel that? That trembling in your chest? That electricity in the atmosphere around you? That's not your imagination. That's the rumble before the roar. That's the cracking before the collapse. That's heaven positioning its angels with their trumpets, waiting for your shout. Joshua 6:16 says, "On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. 7 times on the 7th day. And then Joshua told the people something that changed everything. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Not will give, has given, past tense, already done, decided in eternity. Your victory was sealed before your first march began. You've circled long enough, beloved. The walls that have mocked you for decades are already cracking. Can you hear it? Does that sound like thunder underground? That's the foundation of every impossibility in your life beginning to shift. Your 7th day isn't coming. Your 7th day is no. That marriage they said was dead, it's resurrection morning. That child they said would never come home, heaven just dispatched the angels to bring them to their senses. That financial curse that's haunted your bloodline for generations, the treasury of heaven just opened your account. But here's what Joshua knew that most believers never learn. The walls don't fall automatically on the 7th day. They fall when God's people stop marching in silence and start shouting in faith. The walls of your Jericho are waiting for the sound of your voice aligned with heaven's decree. They're not going to crumble because you've walked long enough. They're going to collapse because you finally understand that your marching was never about proving your faithfulness. It was about positioning you for your miracle. So right now, and I mean right now, I need you to do something that's going to terrify every demon assigned to your destruction. I need you to drop today's date in the comments. Not tomorrow's date. Not next week. Today's date. That date becomes your spiritual timestamp. The moment heaven moved from silence to symphony. The moment your marching turned into shouting. The moment your seventh day became your victory lap. Because when Joshua's army shouted on that seventh day, Joshua 6:20 tells us exactly what happened. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. Your walls have been listening to your footsteps for decades, but they've never heard your victory shout. They've never felt the frequency of your faith when it stops begging and starts commanding. The seventh day has come, chosen one. The question that will determine your destiny is this. Will you keep marching in circles, or will you finally let heaven hear your roar? Dear chosen one, I need you to sit down for what I'm about to reveal. Because what's been hidden from you isn't just information, it's your identity. And the moment you understand this truth, everything changes. Forever. For 70, 80, maybe 90 years, you've been living under the greatest deception ever orchestrated against God's people. They told you that reaching retirement meant reaching irrelevance, that collecting Social Security meant you were collecting dust on heaven's shelf, that your Medicare card was proof that your ministry card had expired. But I'm here to tear that lie from its foundation and show you what hell has been desperately trying to hide. You see, there's something the enemy knows about you that you've forgotten about yourself. Every attack on your health wasn't random, it was strategic. Every financial struggle that hit right when you thought you were getting ahead wasn't coincidence, it was warfare. Every time your own children made you feel like a burden. Every time the church treated you like furniture. Every time society whispered step aside, that wasn't abandonment. That was fear. They weren't pushing you aside because you were powerless. They were pushing you aside because you were too powerful, and they could sense it even when you couldn't. Listen to me carefully, beloved. Deuteronomy 34:7 tells us that Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. 120. But here's what'll shake you. Moses didn't even start his real ministry until he was 80. 80 years old, with a speech impediment, facing down the most powerful empire on earth. And what did God say? Now you're ready. You think your age disqualifies you? Moses split the Red Sea at 80. You think your limitations disqualify you? Moses had a stutter and moved nations. You think your past disqualifies you? Moses was a murderer who became God's mouthpiece. Your age isn't your disqualification, it's your authorization. Your scars aren't your shame, they're your credentials. Your years aren't counting down, they're counting up to your greatest assignment. But here's the hidden truth they never wanted you to discover. You've been called not to survive, but to shake atmospheres. Every prayer you've whispered in secret has been building spiritual pressure. Every tear you've cried has been filling heaven's bottles. Every faithful step you've taken when nobody was watching has been accumulating authority in the spiritual realm. You weren't just enduring, you were qualifying. The enemy saw what was coming. He saw that when you finally stepped into your full understanding, when you realized that your retirement wasn't God putting you on the shelf but positioning you for deployment, his kingdom would face its greatest threat. Because what terrifies hell more than a young person with energy? An old saint with authority. Think about Anna, the prophetess. Luke 2:36 tells us she was 84 years old, spending every day in the temple, praying and fasting. 84. Everyone probably thought, poor old Anna, still hanging around when she should be home resting. But when baby Jesus walked through those temple doors, who was the first to recognize the Messiah? Not the young mothers, not the strong fathers. Anna. the 84-year-old woman who'd been preparing her spiritual eyes for decades. Your years haven't dimmed your vision, they've sharpened it. You can see through people's facades because you've lived long enough to recognize the patterns. You can sense when someone's in spiritual trouble because you've been there yourself. You can pray with authority because you've watched God answer impossible prayers before. They told you your age disqualified you. Heaven says it's your authority. But they didn't just lie about your age. They lied about your assignment. You weren't disqualified, you were disguised. God has been hiding you in plain sight, camouflaging his secret weapons as senior citizens, as grandparents, as retirees. Because who suspects the 70-year-old woman at the grocery store of carrying prophetic fire? Who looks at the 80-year-old man feeding pigeons in the park and sees a potential revivalist? The enemy has been scanning for threats, looking for the young and the strong and the obvious. Meanwhile, God has been raising up an army of the overlooked, the underestimated, the supposedly over the hill. An army that hell never saw coming because they were hiding behind wrinkles and grey hair. 2 Corinthians 4:16 declares, "Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day." Did you catch that? Day by day, not year by year. Day by day, your spiritual man is getting stronger, while your natural man might be slowing down. Your body might need more rest, but your spirit is reaching peak performance. And here's the climactic truth that's going to shatter every limitation. This isn't your retirement. This is your redeployment. You thought you were winding down, but heaven is winding you up. You thought you were in the sunset of your life, but God says you're in the sunrise of your purpose. You thought your best days were behind you, but the Almighty whispers, "Child, you haven't even seen what I'm about to do through you." Every closed door in your past was protecting you from settling for less than this moment. Every delay was positioning. Every no was redirected toward this divine yes. God wasn't ignoring your prayers, he was timing your promotion. The restlessness you've been feeling lately, that's not aging anxiety, that's activation energy. The dreams that have been stirring in your sleep, those aren't nostalgia. Those are downloads from heaven about your next chapter. The fire you thought had died in your chest. It was never extinguished, it was just waiting for the right moment to blaze. You are not finishing strong, beloved. You are starting over with everything you've learned, everything you've survived, everything you've accumulated in wisdom and spiritual authority. You are the answer to prayers that haven't been prayed yet. You are the breakthrough that's been building for decades. But the question that will determine whether you step into this truth or let it pass by is simple. Will you keep believing what they told you about your limitations? Or will you finally embrace what heaven has always known about your potential? Because the unveiling isn't just about what they've hidden from you. It's about what God is about to reveal through you to a world that desperately needs to see that his power doesn't decrease with agate, intensifies with surrender. Dear chosen one, I need you to stop everything right now and go back with me. Back to that moment when your world collapsed. When the doctor walked into that sterile room and said words that changed everything. When the phone rang at 2:17 a.m. and you knew before you answered that nothing would ever be the same. When you fell to your knees in that empty house and screamed at God until your voice gave out. You remember, don't you? That specific day when time itself seemed to stop. When the clocks kept ticking but your soul froze. When everyone else kept moving but you couldn't take another step. You've carried that moment for years, haven't you? Like shrapnel in your chest. Like a scar that never quite healed. But what if I told you something that would shatter everything you believed about that darkest hour? What if that moment of absolute devastation wasn't your destruction, but your divine appointment? Listen to me carefully, beloved. That night in the hospital when you held their hand as they took their final breath. That wasn't abandonment. That phone call that brought news no parent should ever hear. That wasn't cruelty. That morning you woke up alone in a bed that once held two. That wasn't punishment. Heaven hit pause. Just like Joshua commanding the sun to stand still over Gibeon, the Almighty froze the battlefield of your life. Not to torture you, not to break you, but to baptize you in a fire so holy that only someone with your exact DNA could survive it. You see, there are moments when heaven needs to perform spiritual surgery so delicate, so precise, that time itself must be suspended. When God needs to transplant something eternal into your mortal frame, when the angels themselves must form a protective circle while the great physician operates on your soul. That's what happened to you that day. While you thought you were dying, God was actually delivering something through you. Something that could only be born in the crushing darkness. Something that required your complete surrender, your total helplessness, your absolute dependence on His strength alone. Remember Job? The Bible says in Job 1:21, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." But here's what most people miss about that scripture. Job didn't say those words in church. He didn't declare that truth from a pulpit. He whispered it through tears, covered in boils, having lost everything that made life worth living. And heaven stood still to hear it. That breakdown you had in your kitchen at 3 a.m., when you couldn't stop shaking, couldn't catch your breath, couldn't remember how to pray. You thought you were having a nervous breakdown. But the angels were witnessing your breakthrough. They weren't silent, dear one. They were circling, creating a sanctuary around your shattered heart while God performed the impossible. You've been carrying shame about that moment, haven't you? Ashamed that you fell apart, ashamed that you doubted, ashamed that you screamed at the very God you'd served faithfully for decades. But what if I told you that your breakdown was actually the most sacred moment of your entire life? That's exactly what happened to you, chosen one. In your darkest hour, when you thought God had forgotten your name, heaven deployed an army of angels to strengthen you for what was coming, to prepare you for an assignment so weighty that only someone who had been broken and rebuilt could carry it. You thought God was late, but He was building a throne from your ashes. You thought He was absent, but He was orchestrating your appointment with destiny. You thought you were being punished, but you were being positioned for something so magnificent that hell itself trembles at the mention of your name. If you've ever survived a moment you can't explain, if you've ever felt time stop while your world fell apart, if you've ever wondered how you're still standing when everything said you should have fallen, just comment, "Time froze for me too." You're not alone in this revelation, dear one. And what you're about to discover next will prove that the very wound that nearly killed you is about to become the doorway through which others find life. Listen to me carefully, chosen one. Come closer. I need to show you something they never wanted you to see. Something that will revolutionize how you look at every wound, every heartbreak, every moment when life carved its signature into your soul. You see that scar on your heart from when your husband of 43 years looked you in the eye and said he never really loved you. You see that wound that still bleeds when you remember finding your son's suicide note on the kitchen table. You see that place in your spirit that went dark the day joy just vanished and never came back. They told you those were leftovers. Damage. Evidence of your failures, your bad choices, your cursed bloodline. They lied. Your scars aren't leftovers, dear one. They're coordinates. Each one marks a divine intersection where heaven broke into your hell and planted something sacred in the soil of your suffering. Let me paint you a picture that will shatter everything you thought you knew about pain. Imagine an ancient cartographer, hunched over parchment, using his own blood as ink to mark the territories he's conquered. Each drop of crimson tells a story. Each stain represents a battle fought, a mountain climbed, a valley survived. That's you, beloved. Your scars are ink on parchment, a map written in blood, not defeat. But here's what breaks my heart. Here's what makes me weep for the body of Christ in America today. You've been sitting in church pews for decades, carrying these sacred wounds, and nobody ever told you the truth about what you were carrying. That betrayal in your marriage, when he chose her over you after you gave him your best years, your best love, your best everything. You thought it destroyed you, but God was positioning you to become the voice that whispers hope to every woman sitting in a divorce lawyer's office, wondering if she'll ever be worthy of love again. That suicide in your family. When your precious boy couldn't carry the weight of this world one more day, you blamed yourself. You replayed every conversation, every missed sign, every moment you could have done something different. But heaven was breaking your heart wide enough to hold every parent who's about to get that phone call, every mother who needs someone to say, "You will survive this." I know, because I did. That season when joy vanished without warning. When you woke up one Tuesday morning and the colors were gone, the laughter was hollow, and you couldn't remember why living mattered. You thought you were losing your mind. But God was excavating space in your spirit for the kind of compassion that can only come from walking through the valley of the shadow of death and choosing to keep walking. Do you understand what I'm telling you? That scar on your soul isn't shameful, it's your seminary degree. That wound isn't weakness, it's your weapon. That pain isn't your past, it's your PhD in human suffering, signed by the nail-scarred hands of Jesus himself. Scripture declares in 2 Corinthians 1-4 that God comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. But most people read that like it's a sweet little verse about feeling better. No, this is combat training. This is God saying, I'm going to break you in exactly the right places so you can heal exactly the right people. You think it's a coincidence that the woman who approaches you at the grocery store always seems to be going through exactly what you survived 5 years ago. You think it's random that your phone rings at 2 a.m. with calls from people you barely know, but somehow they trust you with their deepest pain. Wake up. Your scars are a homing beacon for hurting souls. They can smell the oil of healing in your wounds. They recognize the authority that only comes from surviving what should have killed you. But here's the revelation that's going to change everything. Here's the truth that will transform your pain from a burden into a bridge. What if your suffering wasn't punishment for your past? What if it was preparation for your purpose? What if your pain isn't your past? Is it someone else's path? Right now, in Queens, there's a 67-year-old woman sitting in her car outside a bridge, holding a bottle of pills, convinced that nobody would understand her grief. But you would, because you've been there. Right now, in Manhattan, there's a grandfather who just discovered his son is addicted to heroin, and he's drowning in shame and confusion. But you could help him, because you've walked that road. Right now, in Brooklyn, there's a mother whose daughter won't speak to her anymore, and she's dying inside, wondering where she went wrong. But you have words for her, because your scars taught you the language of restoration. Your wounds aren't random, beloved. They're strategic. God allowed specific pain in your life because he knew there would be specific people who would need exactly what your suffering produced. Your scars are coordinates on heaven's rescue map. But here's what will determine whether your pain becomes purpose or just remains pain. Here's what separates those who transform their wounds into weapons from those who just nurse their hurts forever. You have to stop hiding your scars and start sharing your story. If you have a scar that gave someone else life, if your wound became their window to hope, type it right now. Don't be ashamed. Testify. Declare to this community and to heaven itself, my scars are sacred. Because someone watching this message needs to know that their deepest wound isn't their disqualification, it's their destination. And the only way they'll believe it is if they see the map you've already drawn with your own blood. The question burning in the heart of heaven right now is this: will you keep treating your scars like secrets, or will you finally let them become the roadmap that leads someone else home? Listen to me, chosen one. What I'm about to reveal will shatter everything you thought you knew about why you're still here. Why did you survive when others didn't? Why does your heart still beat with purpose when the world tells you to fade quietly into the background? You think you're just another senior citizen counting down days to eternity. But what if I told you that's the biggest lie ever whispered over your life? What if I told you that every breath you take is a direct answer to prayers that were prayed before you were even born? Your grandmother. Picture her right now. See her kneeling beside that old wooden bed, tears streaming down her weathered face, her arthritic hands clasped together in desperate prayer. Lord, she whispered in 1943, let someone in this bloodline break free. Let someone rise up and serve you with power. Don't let this family stay bound forever. She didn't know she was prophesying over your life. She didn't know that 60, 70, 80 years later, you would be the one sitting here, feeling the fire of God stirring in your chest as these words hit your spirit like lightning. Your grandfather, that man who carried shame he never spoke about, that man who felt like a failure because he couldn't provide the way he wanted to. He'd sit on his front porch after 16-hour days, staring at the stars, and whisper, "God, I may not be much, but please, let my blood carry something holy. Let my lineage matter for your kingdom." He was planting seeds in the spiritual realm that wouldn't bloom until this very moment. Seeds that are exploding into harvest as you hear these words. You see, beloved, your veins don't just carry blood, they carry whispers. Whispers of faith that refused to die. Whispers of prayers that were never fully answered. Until you. Your bones don't just hold you upright, they remember promises. Promises God made to generations who walked through valleys you can't even imagine, all so you could stand on this mountain of breakthrough. You are not an accident of genetics. You are the crescendo of a generational symphony that's been building for over a century. But here's what the enemy never wanted you to understand. He didn't just attack you randomly. He studied your lineage. He saw what was coming through your bloodline. He saw the prayers of Anna, your great-grandmother, who fasted 3 days every month for 70 years, begging God to send revival through her family tree. He saw the faithfulness of Ruth, your grandmother's sister, who never married but spent 60 years interceding for her nephews and nieces she'd never met. That's why your life has been so hard. That's why the battles have been so intense. That's why it felt like hell itself was mobilized against you. Because the enemy saw what heaven had planted in your spiritual DNA, and he was terrified. Every night you cried yourself to sleep, wondering if God had forgotten you. Your ancestors were surrounding your bed, whispering, "Hold on, you're the one we've been praying for." Every time you wanted to give up, their faith was pumping through your bloodstream, keeping you alive when death seemed easier. Think about Moses. Exodus 2 tells us his mother hid him for 3 months, then put him in a basket on the Nile River. But that wasn't just a desperate mother's last resort. That was a woman who knew her son carried the deliverance of an entire nation. She didn't just save a baby, she saved a deliverer. She protected a bloodline that would split seas and speak to God face to face. That's exactly what your mother did when she refused to abort you in 1940 something NG, even though the doctor said it was too dangerous. That's what your father did when he worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, even though his back was screaming in pain. They weren't just raising children, they were protecting carriers of divine assignment. Look at Caleb in Numbers 13. 85 years old, standing before Joshua, and what does he say? "Give me this mountain." At 85. While other men his age were sitting in rocking chairs, Caleb was claiming territory and conquering giants. Why? Because he understood something that most people never grasp. He understood that age isn't a limitation, it's an accumulation. Every year he lived, every battle he fought, every victory he won was preparing him for his greatest conquest. You are Caleb in this generation. Your 85 years aren't evidence that you're finished. They're evidence that you're finally loaded with enough wisdom, enough faith, enough battle experience to take the mountain that younger warriors couldn't even see. Chosen one, as we come to the end of this sacred encounter, I need you to carry these eternal truths with you like precious jewels in your heart. Remember this: you were not an accident of biology. You were a divine intervention, summoned before time began, marked with heaven's fingerprint, and sent to this earth for such a time as this. The silence you endured wasn't abandonment, it was alignment. The delays weren't denials, they were divine preparation for a purpose so magnificent that it required decades of refinement to make you ready. Remember that every scar you carry is sacred, every tear you've shed has been collected in heaven's bottles, and every prayer you've whispered in the darkness has been building toward this moment of awakening. Your age is not your limitation, it's your qualification. Your experience is not your burden, it's your authority. Your scars are not your shame, they're your credentials in the kingdom of God. And remember that you are the answer to generations of prayer. You carry the DNA of divine destiny, the bloodline of breakthrough, the accumulated faith of ancestors who never stopped believing that someone in their lineage would rise up and shake the gates of hell. That someone is you. But beloved, you are not walking this path alone. Even when the road feels uncertain, even when doubt whispers lies in the dark, even when the assignment seems too big for your human frame, the same God who parted the Red Sea, who made the sun stand still, who raised Jesus from the dead, is still moving in your life. He's still opening doors that no man can shut. He's still making ways where there seems to be no way. He's still working all things together for your good and His glory. And beyond that, you have something beautiful right here, right now. Look around these comments. See these hearts connecting. Feel these spirits resonating with the same fire that burns in your chest. You've found your tribe, chosen one. This isn't just a YouTube channel. This is a community of awakened souls, divine warriors, generational chain breakers who understand the weight of carrying heaven's assignment on earth. We see you, we understand you, we believe in you, and we're ready to stand with you in prayer, in faith, and in the power of God's love. So let me ask you this final question, and let it settle deep in your spirit. Now that you know who you really are, now that you understand why your life has been so hard, why you felt so different, why your heart burns with purpose that this world cannot contain, what will you do with this revelation? Will you shrink back into the shadows of doubt, or will you rise up and walk in the authority that heaven has placed upon your life? Before you answer that question, join me in this prayer. Wherever you are, in your living room, your bedroom, sitting in your car place, your hand on your heart, and let me speak over your life with the authority of 5 decades walking with the Almighty. Heavenly Father, Creator of all things, the Ancient of Days, the God who was and is to come, I come before you now carrying every precious soul who has heard this message. Lord, they've walked through valleys that would have broken lesser spirits. They've endured winters that seemed endless. They've carried burdens that were never meant for their shoulders alone. But Father, tonight, everything changes. Let every word of truth that has been spoken over them take root in the deepest places of their hearts. Let every lie the enemy has whispered about their age, their worth, their purpose be silenced forever. Let them feel your presence right now, in this very moment, like a warm embrace that reminds them they are loved beyond measure. God, breathe fresh strength into their weary bones. Restore their joy, renew their hope, reignite the fire in their spirits that may have dimmed but never died. Open their eyes to see the doors you're opening. Open their ears to hear your voice above the noise. Open their hearts to receive the love you've been pouring out, even when they couldn't feel it. Father, bless their families, heal their relationships, restore what the enemy has stolen. Provide for every need according to your riches in glory. Give them favor with men and supernatural breakthroughs in every area of their lives. And Lord, use them. Use their stories to heal the brokenhearted. Use their scars to bring hope to the hopeless. Use their voices to speak life into dead situations. Let them become living testimonies of your faithfulness, walking miracles that prove you still move mountains. Now, Chosen One, I want to hear from you. In the comments below, share what God spoke to your heart today. What truth broke through the darkness? What lie did you finally release? What calling are you ready to step into? Don't keep this breakthrough to yourself. Your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to break free from their own bondage. Ask questions, share your struggles. Let this community surround you with prayer and encouragement. Because iron sharpens iron, and together we are stronger than we could ever be alone. And please, if this message has touched your soul, if something eternal has shifted in your spirit tonight, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. There's someone in your life right now, a friend, a family member, a fellow believer who's been feeling forgotten, overlooked, counted out by the world. They need to know that God hasn't forgotten them. They need to know their story isn't over. They need to know they're chosen too. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. Thank you for opening your heart to receive what heaven wanted to pour into you. Thank you for being brave enough to believe that your greatest days are still ahead of you. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. You're not just subscribing to content, you're joining a movement of God's chosen ones who refuse to be silent any longer. Every week, we're diving deeper into the mysteries of your divine identity, unpacking the calling on your life, and building a community where miracles happen and destinies are fulfilled. Remember, beloved, you are chosen, you are loved, and you are never, ever alone. Your assignment is not finished. Your voice still matters. Your life still has purpose. Go in the power of the Most High God. Go in the authority of His love. Go in the certainty that heaven is cheering you on. Until we meet again, keep burning bright, chosen ones. The world needs your light.